partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 348. My guest this week is Ken Gronbach, and he is with KGC Direct LLC, and he is nice enough to come on and talk about what's going on. Ken, how you doing, man?
Good to be here.
Good, man. I appreciate you coming on. And this is a topic that I've stumbled upon here of late, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. So, Ken, you're a demographer. So I guess explain what that is and why it's important.
Well, demographers count people, and they count a lot of things, but primarily we count people, and we count live births, immigration, aging, and death. And when you understand those things, very, very simple stuff, you can forecast markets, you can forecast labor pools.
Right on. So I found
you could forecast economies.
Right. Yeah. So that's that was the most interesting thing here. So I listen to a show called Coast to Coast AM from time to time, and it's a late night show, and I enjoy listening to it. And Ken was a guest on there, and that's how I found him. And Ken was talking about a lot of really cool things that, quite frankly, I've never even heard about. And I used to think I was pretty good at staying up on the news and things going on around us, but I was way off on this one. So, Ken, let's start like this. So, from a demographic perspective, the world, with the exception of just a handful of countries, their birth rates aren't keeping up with the amount of people that are aging out of the workforce. So I guess talk about that a little bit from a very high level and how you see that affecting the United States and other parts of the world.
Well, let's start with China.
Okay.
China, about 9 years ahead of schedule, 9 years ahead of projections by demographers, has gone from being an aging country to an age-ed country. China recently, they've been boasting about their population being 1.4 billion, and recently did a survey or a census and discovered that they were overestimating by 100 million. So, a little 100 million here, 100 million there. Right. So they're at about 1.3, but that's really not the issue. When you look at a population, you just don't look at the size of it, you look at the age of it and where is the dominance. Because of China's one-child-only policy that was in force since about 1979, I think, and I believe it was at the suggestion of Henry Kissinger, believe it or not. They have prevented, and that's the word that they use, about 500 million people in their country because they were destined to be overpopulated, they thought. So when you're missing 500 million people under 40, you have a labor problem. And I don't know why. I got to tell you this because I've been essentially warning folks about China for 20 years. And I said, they're gonna run into a situation where they're simply not going to have enough labor to accommodate their infrastructure. And guess what? They don't. So they've gone from being an aging country to an age-ed country, 9 years ahead of schedule. And what that means simply is more people are dying than being born, which means their population is shrinking. If you have a market economy, one thing that you can't do in a market economy, one thing you essentially can't do in a business, businesses can grow. but they are super challenged when it comes to shrinking. So what's going to happen to China is China's going to shrink. And right now, internally, they have enough of an issue with their labor to take their economy down easily. Their population is going to shrink from 1.3 billion to about 700 million 2050, 2060. Now, the ramifications of that are so huge. I wouldn't know where to start.
Right.
But they're a market economy, and they've cooked themselves. They haven't shot themselves in the foot. They've blown their foot off.
Wow. Okay. So that's a big deal. So as you're looking at from an agriculture perspective, because that's what I do, right? So I'm looking at selling farm equipment and those kind of things. If you take out a country like China that is totally dependent on getting things from around the world, oil, gas, fuel, food, whatever, everything. If you're down to a country like that where they've almost cut themselves in half, what's that do to the overall perspective of food supplies? And I'm sure if this is happening in China, there's other places around the world this is happening too. So as you're looking at the flow of goods from one point to another point, how is that going to affect the overall world economy over the next 20 to 30 years?
We're going to have to adjust and adjust significantly. Listen, just to be clear, Casey, I'm not an economist. I'm a demographer.
Sure.
Everything I do is 30,000 feet, big picture, macro, long term. I don't get into the DNA of subjects.
Sure.
But I can tell you this: the problem with fertility, and that's another problem, obviously, with China, is they're not having kids, and they can't have kids, even though they're trying to facilitate a culture of forcing people to have kids. With the one child only policy, they've essentially eliminated parents, and you need parents to have kids. I don't mean to be facetious, but that's how it works. The rest of the world, including EU, Eastern Europe, Russia is a disaster demographically, totally. And so where's the future of the world? The future of the world is the Americas. It's Canada, United States, Mexico, Central and South America. The United States, 40, 50 years from now, 30, 40, 50 years from now, has a stable population, and it will grow slightly. It might even grow significantly, owing to our immigration policies. And if we don't cut off immigration, because immigration we're a nation of immigrants, period.
Right.
We need immigration. So what's going to happen is I think you're going to see the end of globalization and supply chain issues, but the center of the earth is going to be the Americas, period.
Okay.
I hope that doesn't freak you out.
It's just when you start thinking about how all this comes together, and then the infrastructures that come into play, skilled labor, all those things that come into play. I think you talked about this a little bit when you're on Coast, was that we had this wave of Mexican immigration in the United States, and we've kind of hit that peak now. We've kind of peaked out there, but the folks that we see coming now to the border are Central Americans, and they're coming in through the border, and the way that starts to look and starts to play out. When you start looking at skilled labor and labor forces, you can't hardly go anywhere right now in the United States without seeing a help wanted sign in somebody's window somewhere. As you're looking at the labor force over the next 20 years, where's that growth come from for the United States?
Well, there's a couple of things that you have to take into consideration. Between 1985 and 2004, we produced the biggest population, the biggest generation in our history. It's called the Generation Y, millennials, and there's 88 million of them. There's a high percentage of them that are Latino, but they're the biggest population. The non-Latino part of that population also is huge, but not 88 million. For some reason, and I can't understand this, and somebody's going to give me the psychology of this, but helicopter parents, baby boomers, these are their kids, and for some reason they've moved adolescents from 20 years old to 30 years old. So these kids are only just now, this massive population generation born 85 to 2004 that are currently 19 to 38 years old are finally being felt in the labor force. So I think we're going to get a significant amount of labor from that group. The shortage, the folks, and I don't know when you were born, but we have a shortage in this country of people born 1965 to 1984, and that's called the Generation X. Generation X. Is that your generation?
77. Yep.
Yeah, well, you're the problem. I'm sorry, but I'm just calling it like it is.
Right.
The Generation X was only about 69 million, and they were about 11 or 12% smaller than the boomers that they followed. Boomers were roughly 79 million, 80 million. So when it came time for Generation X, your generation, to supply the labor necessary to satisfy the boomers who had amassed wealth and were demanding labor, you couldn't do it. And that's what sucked in the Latinos. So we have a crop of Latinos in the United States that are about 60 million. It's a big group. Where's the labor going to come from? Not only from the Latinos that are currently here, but from their kids. And the Latinos are having kids, and it's a very, very good thing. And I'll give you an example. 1957 was our record year for the United States relative to babies, 4,300,000. We broke that record in 2007, 51 years later, with 4,316,000 babies, 25% of which were Latino. Once these but it's still a young group. Once that group gets educated and finds its way into the labor force and finds its way into government and finds its way into education, we're going to have all the labor we need. We're fine.
Okay, good. So when you're looking at, I guess, can you speak to how you think technology is going to play into the labor force, and what's that going to do? How is that going to offset any of, like you're talking about the group coming in now, and you're looking at where they're at, the millennials. Do you foresee technology playing any big part of
Yeah,
that?
I do.
Yeah,
no, it very much could, and that's not something that's not a question for a demographer. But I will tell you this: I sincerely believe that artificial intelligence and robotics and so forth will cushion the blow. Right now, in the United States, we're about 10 million workers short of our needs. There's roughly 10 million empty positions. We have about 5 million people in the United States that are on unemployment compensation, but those two don't marry. And for some reason, we can't have one solve the other. But going forward, we have an issue, and that is we have a labor issue that needs to be corrected. And can I tell you the biggest single issue?
Sure.
Okay. If you look at the population between 25 and 55 in the United States, you have a roughly 120 million people, men and women. Let's take the women out of the equation because women are not the issue. Of the 60 million men that are between 25 and 55 in the United States, we have a significant portion of them that do not work. They're underemployed or unemployed because they are felons. They can't even drive a truck because you can't bond them. Right. They cannot get serious jobs because they're felons. We need to correct that. We need to fix that. We need to partner with the prisons and prevent the recidivism that, it's just a spinning wheel.
Sure.
And I think we can correct that.
Yeah.
So that's before our legislatures, and I'm hoping they're considering that.
That's a good point. I never actually thought about that, but that's a really good point that you make there. When you're looking at so the Americas are going to be, the center point of the world moving forward here. There's a lot of skilled labor that's all over the world when you start looking at super chip conductors and all the stuff that goes into that, and the scientists and engineers and everything that come into play. There's going to be a huge influx of highly skilled labor that comes into the United States between now and the next 20 and 30 years, I guess. So I guess speaking from a jobs perspective and those kind of things, how do you see that playing out, and how do you see the overall economy? I guess economy is not the right word, but how do you see those jobs coming into play and the number of people coming to the United States?
Well, as long as we don't lose the fact and the understanding that the United States is a nation of immigrants. The people that were here are Native Americans.
Sure.
We are a nation of immigrants. Most of our immigrants came from Germany.
Yeah.
There's about 70 million people in the United States that are of German descent. In my opinion, Casey, is just going to make us stronger. As long as we understand that immigration is our strength and stop, this building of walls and all this, the murderers and rapists. No, we are a nation of immigrants, period. No problem.
Yep.
I take a lot of heat for that because I get a lot of extreme right-wing people that think I'm crazy, but no, it's true. I can prove it with history.
Yeah, it's not that hard to point to make that connect those dots. That's a pretty simple thing to do. So Ken, as you look out right now in the next immediate 10 to 15 years, what are some of the things you're paying attention to, and what's high on your radar right now as far as some of these shifts that you see happening?
Well, are we talking about worldwide or United States?
Both. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're gonna, all things being equal, unless China for some reason starts taking in immigrants, which they will not. 92% of the people in China are Han, and they do not do immigrants. They're xenophobic. They just don't like anybody that doesn't look like them. And so China is going to it will shrink. Also, Japan is already in the tank, and recently South Korea their fertility dropped to the lowest point in their history, and they're at the lowest point of anybody in the world, which is about 0.8, 0.7 kids per couple. You can't do that. You cannot. You need to breed. We need to breed. We need to have kids. If you don't have kids, you don't have adults, you don't have taxpayers, you don't have labor, you don't have military, you don't have consumers, you don't have anything. What's going to happen in the EU? Already, Italy has gone from being an aging country to an age-end country, which means more people are dying than being born. Same thing for Portugal, Spain, France, and soon to be Germany and Poland, all of the Eastern European countries. And I said earlier that Russia's population is a crash and burn disaster. If Russia and Ukraine don't get this war over soon, they're not going to have enough young men to man an army. Yeah. Literally not going to have enough young. And I wish Vladimir Putin would have called me, because I could have told him he's not going to annex 40 million healthy people in the Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have any kids. And you know what Ukraine has an abundance of? 40 plus women, 40-year-old plus women, an abundance. So
yeah,
you can't do that. You can't pretend that the population, if you have a population of 40 million people, that they're healthy and good and consumers. No, all of that. You need to know how old they are, what's their ethnicity, what's their gender, and then you can make very simple projections.
Yeah. It's so I've been to Ukraine a few times, and the I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like there was 3 men to every 4 women or something like that, or 3 men to 5 women or something. But there was the amount of women, drastically outweighed the number of men. And to your point, there was a large amount of women that were in that 40 something plus that had not ever had kids because they had not married and not, gone on that way.
You need to have, when you have kids, you need a man and a woman.
That's important. Yeah.
Something else. China has 90 million more under 40 years old, 90 million more males than females, and they have no prospect of ever marrying. None.
Yeah. That's another question I want to ask you about too. So China they did this one child only policy for a while, and then they've about 5 years ago, they've kind of reversed that and kind of, okay, you can have 2 now you can have 3, now you can have as many as you want, but it's still not catching on. And you don't actually, I think the birth rate's gone down even though they've opened up this as many kids as you want policy now. So you're seeing it, you're like, it gets to your point. I mean, you got 90 million more guys than you do women. That's a rough night at the bar. I'm going to lie to you. Not very good odds there,
Well, but it goes back to the comment I made earlier about parents. No, when their one child only policy wiped out generations of parents.
Yeah.
Generations, at least 2 generations of parents. You know, when you have 40 years where you're missing 500 million people, you have an issue. China, and I say this, in fact, I said it on Nuri's program in Coast to Coast. China has no way to recover from this. And he said, well, what are they going to do about Taiwan? I said, there's no way they will ever go into Taiwan. They can't. Their economy wouldn't sustain that, period.
Yep. Are there other countries besides the Americas that you see that are going to be have a chance to really prosper here in the next 20, 30 years?
The continent of Africa. Continent of Africa has 52 countries. Mm-hmm. They have a fertility of 6 overall. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen there. And I tell, you know, I speak to a lot of companies, and I actually I speak to manufacturers, and I prevented a manufacturer from building a multi-billion-dollar plant in China because I told them what was going to happen, and they said, "Whoa, wait a minute, we got to think this over." And once they did the math, they bailed out. China, excuse me, the continent of Africa is going to have plenty of bodies, plenty of people, but it needs, we need to, or somebody needs to do something about the level of corruption there, because that's what's holding them back. Mm-hmm. Even China went in there. China was buying ports in Africa, but I don't know what for.
Right. Yeah. China, Africa's I tried to export stuff into Africa before, and it's just, it's a whole thing. It's one, it's so I mean, I think that's the big thing too, is when you start looking at tribalism, it's just one of those things where and I think in Europe and in the Americas, and the United States especially, we don't understand how tribalism works. And you're from one tribe, I'm from another tribe, and we hate each other, and we're never going to work together. And I'm going to get control one day and oust you guys out, and you're going to do the same thing back and forth. And it's just it's like an endless cycle of just getting nowhere quick, is what it feels like. So it's a tough market to figure out.
Yes, a tough market. And from a demographic standpoint, they have the bodies. I believe that the continent of Africa right now boasts about a billion people. It could go to 3 or 4 billion based on their fertility. But I don't know what's going to happen, because the rest of it becomes DNA for me, and I just can't go in that small or tight. You just taught me something about tribalism. That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't take it. I found it on Wikipedia, so be careful with that. All right, Ken, it's been a really honor to have you on here, man. You got some good points here to think about. If folks want to reach out to you and get more information about what it is that you're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Best way to do that is on my website, which is kgcdirect.com, kgcdirect.com. And I'm very easy to reach. In fact, I tell folks there aren't many demographers. You have to understand that. And there might be 100 of us in the world. And I don't know why. I really don't know why, Casey, but if you Google Ken, my first name, demographer, I come up wall to wall. That's all you need. Ken demographer.
Right on. Okay. Yeah. Well, Ken, I really appreciate you being on the podcast, man.
My pleasure. And God bless you, and move some iron.
I will try. Thank you very much, sir. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast, and go to the YouTube channel where you can see the video version of this. That's the Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. Check it out there. Go to MovingIronLLC.com for everything Moving Iron related, and check out the Moving Iron Summit coming up here in Nashville, Tennessee, September 11th through the 13th. So with that, I'm Casey Seymour with Ken Gronbach. Let's move some iron, folks. Out.
Take care.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard